So, welcome back to News from the Roots. Today is, what is today? It's Wednesday, January 31st, 2018. And this is a special edition of News from the Roots. I have Connie Jean Conklin back on. We started this conversation last Wednesday, and we're just going to continue it with some graphics this time, and hopefully we'll put on a good show for you here. So I'm going to go operate the camera, and I'm going to let Connie Jean talk about her subject and the work she's been doing, and tell us something about mental health and the issue of abuse, mostly, I think.
Yeah.
So, okay, the show is yours.
Okay. Yeah, slide 7. What I'm going to do is a brief overview of what I talked about already, but it'll be a little faster so I can get into discussing ACE scores, which is where we left off. And I will end with what you can do. There's, I have a whole list of things that you could do if you want to be help other survivors.
Okay.
Okay. I'll start with, again, our vision. Our vision is a world where every child is raised in a loving and nurturing environment, so there is no need to help adult survivors of child abuse. Our beliefs are: children should always be loved and nurtured by the people who raise them. Children should always feel safe and secure in their environment. And children should grow into adults who feel safe in their world, in control of their life, and able to contribute to society in a meaningful way. Our mission, CSCAP is a nonprofit organization, or hopefully soon to be nonprofit organization, dedicated to creating, finding, and or providing a supportive living environment for adult survivors of child abuse for the purpose of allowing them the safety and security they need to focus on their recovery. This is our when we started out, we actually, because there was nothing out there for help, and this was in the 90s, early 90s, we actually envisioned someday a facility where people could come and stay, not have to worry about paying bills while they focus on recovery, get therapists in. I'm happy to say that's not, sad to say it's not practical, it's not going to happen, but happy to say it's not as much needed as it was then, because at least there is some kind of help out there now. But there's always room for more. People don't know the issues and struggles of adult survivors. They don't understand that, when you turn 18, you're not suddenly an adult and all problems are gone. If you've been raised with trauma all your life, and you learn to not trust the world. You learn not to trust other people. You learn to function in a way that keeps you surviving in a very, dysfunctional family situation, in the world of violence. But when you become an adult and you have to go out into the real world, you have to learn who you can trust. You have to be able to work with other people and function. All of those skills are worthless. You need a whole new set of skills, and it's not an easy thing to learn. You have to unlearn everything. And now, when I get to the ACE scores, I'll be explaining why it's even harder with a new knowledge about how physical health is impacted and brain changes occur with a lifelong, childhood of trauma and abuse. I want to point out that the majority of abuse, you can go to 6, the majority of abuse occurs in the home by a parent or guardian. That's a generally accepted number, about 80%. If a child's abused outside the home, comes home to a loving environment, even if they're not able to talk about it, they usually learn to cope with it, and it doesn't have the same long-lasting impact. Assuming it's a one-time thing, some stranger you know. But the point is, with most of the abuse coming from within your family, you grow up with no support network. So as adults, the only support we have is other survivors who have made it through and are able to be supportive of us. We can't count on other people. We don't have a parent or guardian who is going to go out and advocate for us and help us in our recovery, because they're the ones that caused it. And for years that was the focus with NAMI. They were the parent of schizophrenics, brain diseases, and they were emphasizing not the parent's fault. Well, brain diseases are not the parent's fault. Schizophrenia and a lot of bipolars, but the results of child abuse, that more often than not is the parent's fault. We grow up not knowing what's normal. We have to work through, because we're the only advocates for other survivors, is those of us in recovery. What is child abuse? Now this is going to be easy because they're all up here on slides and in order. 8. Go ahead and go to number 8, yeah, and then it'll just go from there.
You tell me when to change.
Yeah, 8 is, I can't see it.
Neglect is the most.
Neglect. Okay, neglect is the most prevalent kind of abuse, and it is the only form of abuse that is linked to income. Every other kind, every abuse out there is it happens in all socioeconomic status. It's everywhere. It doesn't matter where you come from. It's pretty equally distributed, except for neglect, and that is because it's when the parents don't have the money to feed their kids, and it's not purposeful, but just not being there for the kid is neglect, and it's quite common, especially, and I'm thinking it's becoming more common with both parents having to work 2 jobs. It's hard to be there for the kids. You come home stressed. It's not a good thing that there's nobody being able to be home raising kids these days. So that's something to think about in the long term. And the next one is the definition of physical abuse. Okay, the definition of physical abuse. The key thing with a physical abuse is, I've had this discussion a lot with people about corporal punishment. Okay, and what it boils down to, if you use a physical punishment for a child, but you let them know what behavior it is they did wrong, that this is consequences for that behavior, but you love them, you care about them, you're doing this because you care about them, it doesn't have the same impact. Physical abuse is when it's punishment that does not fit the child's age or physical condition, or it doesn't like isolate them in the middle of like locking them in a closet for a week. Those kind of things are way beyond anything that can be considered corporal punishment. It's throwing a kid against the wall or of any age, even if you don't end up bruised. And if there's any kind of physical scars, that's generally considered physical abuse beyond just punishment. The next one is
sexual abuse.
Sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is even just verbal, using, saying words that are inappropriate to a child under 18 can be considered sexual abuse. They do put in now that sexual abuse needs to be by somebody more than 5 years older, because there have been a lot of 17, 18-year-olds with, who are dating somebody who's 19 or 20, and they, that's not really abuse. That's, you can consent when somebody's just a few years older, but you're not able to consent when an adult comes in and says all the inappropriate things or expects any kind of sexual favors, or and then we can go on to the last one,
physical abuse?
That was physical abuse. The next one is emotional.
Well, this one says physical abuse. These are common. Okay, I guess maybe we have that in there more than once.
Yeah, it looks like we've got.
We've got sexual abuse in there too. Okay.
Yeah.
How about?
Okay, I don't have emotional abuse up there. Go ahead and put that up there, and I'm going to talk about emotional abuse. Emotional abuse.
Is that what this is?
No, really, that's just something I thought worth noting. It's apparently didn't get through. That's all right.
Okay.
I might not have had a good one to turn into a slide. Emotional abuse is the worst as far as damaging type of abuse. And I can give you some examples of that from people I know. All right. My situation was I had a mother who you never knew from one day to the next what was okay and what was wrong. I could come home one day and whatever I'd done would give me a bowl of ice cream as a reward. I could come home a different day and whatever I'd done was go to your room and wait for your dad to come home with a belt. And so, I mean, that's emotional abuse. You're not going to learn right from wrong if you don't have a clue what it is, you know. And then I know someone whose abuse was, all right, his father was a well-known, well-respected medical doctor who, you know, took care of all of his kids except my one friend because his father, the doctor, labeled him mentally retarded. And he said, well, he wasn't worth educating. He didn't spend any time with him. And then he ended up having other abuses too, his stepmother and everything. That was physically abusive and sexually abusive. So he had all that. But the worst part, the part that I see him having to work to deal with, was that his father totally rejected him as worthless, not even going to bother trying to give you an education. He didn't help him with homework, didn't help him through school. And when he became an adult, he was determined to prove his father wrong, and has been going to college ever since. Has a bachelor's degree and he has honors in his subject, and he's determined he's someday going to get his PhD. Even if it takes him a lifetime, and he's paying for every single dime of it. And, you know, I mean, it's obvious he's not retarded, but he does have some expressive problems. I think it's, you know, maybe a learning disability that's mild enough that, you know, that his father just totally rejected him over it. And that's very traumatic. He's got a higher A score than I do, much higher. Anyways, emotional abuse is, like I say, the most damaging. When we talk about A scores, you're going to see that people with a lot of emotional abuse are going to be the people with the higher A scores, and the people who have the most trouble in recovery and ever making changes in their life for the better, because it's difficult to overcome. It's your identity. You know, you accept that identity when it's somebody you respect and that you're supposed to be able to trust to be there for you, take care of you, defend you if you need it, and they're the ones tearing you down. It can be very damaging. I want to get into and most of these are on the papers in front of me. I couldn't get the slides. I couldn't get the pictures for them. I want to talk a little bit about what is complex trauma. Complex trauma is traumatic stressors that are interpersonal. That means they come from somebody you know and should be able to trust. And they're premeditated, planned, often, though I think some aren't. I don't think my mother always knew what she was going to do when I got home. But they exploit another person. If it's a parent or guardian, it can cause severe problems, and generally it is. A parent or guardian should foster feelings of safety and security, and when they don't, the child develops doubt about trustworthiness of others in general. They don't trust anybody. And abused children are always worried and hypervigilant because they learn to watch over their shoulder everywhere they go for when the next thing is going to come. They often, they're taught not to tell about the abuse, especially if it's like sexual abuse. You know, this is what's going to happen if you tell anybody. And that's, that adds. There's secondary traumatization. Every time that somebody doesn't believe you. A lot of people I know, a lot of females I know that were abused by a father, stepfather, brother, will tell you that, you know, they tried to talk to their mother and she believed the abuser over them, and that's worse than the abuse. They have, you know, to be turned away by a parent. And it's a secondary traumatization when they hear that. It compounds over time because it generally, if it's in your home, it's something that keeps happening. And it causes changes, which I'm going to talk about with, a lot of mental health professionals don't really understand, and that's another re-traumatization when they don't. For decades, for instance, borderline personality disorder was considered a character flaw. You know, it was a diagnosis I fought against all the years I was receiving treatment. I have some borderline characteristics, not enough to really fit the diagnosis. But every time somebody tried to give me that diagnosis, it was like, no, it's not me. It's, you know, this is what happened to me. It's not me. You know, nowadays they are accepting that it's often caused by abuse, but it still doesn't fit the definition of everybody. Some of these are upside down. Yep, you're just playing with upside down. Okay, I turn these inside out somewhere along this stack. What I want to talk about is, well, there's a doctor. How the heck do that every time I think I've got it all sorted out. All right, this is the beginning of the age study. Here it is. This is what I want to talk about. Robert Scaur. I don't know how you S-C-A-E-R. He's a medical doctor, but on his he's on a TEDx is where I got this information. He's talking about PTSD in general. He works with military vets, but I thought this was a really good. Before I get into complex PTSD and the long-term effects, because he pointed out some really useful things here. His definition of trauma is any negative life event that occurs in a state of relative helplessness. And I have another person who put it similarly. It's basically if you, well, you know, it might seem traumatic. You run out of, you know, I'm an ill, have to run to the store. Well, that's not trauma. Trauma is when you actually fear for your life. You think at any minute you could die, and you have no control. You feel you have no control over. That is a traumatic experience when we come to talking about the ACE scores. Okay. He talks about, years ago, they used to believe that the child's brain was very, had a lot of plasticity. It could be repaired. It could repair itself. And now they know, and this is other people have talked about this too, that the brain is not fully formed. Now they're saying until the early 20s. And I know I had heard 4 or 5, you know, because that's when they're more likely to be complex PTSD as opposed to a dissociative identity disorder. The abuse is earlier. But now they're saying no, into the 20s, and if you study autism, they now say close to 30. before the brain is fully, it's not going to go through any changes. Okay, and that's quite old. And Dr. Scour, however you say it, he talks about how fetuses' brains can be damaged by if their mother is going through the trauma. But this, and she's going through a lot of toxic stress, and I get into one of these talked about the definition of toxic stress is continuing that kind of traumatic events that just maybe not be life or death, but they're you're once you start knowing that these things can be happening and you're expecting them, and a lot of things become toxic stress. What happens is when you're under that kind of stress, all right, the part of the brain that goes to work, and Robert Scour is the one that brought up. I was trying to think I had to learn to understand every little part of the brain, all the chemicals in the brain, and then I heard a medical doctor get up there and refer to the primitive brain versus the cortical thinking. Huh?
You want that diagram up there?
Yes, go ahead and move up the diagram of the brain.
Yeah.
I don't have all 3 pages of that up there. There's actually 3 full pages.
Yeah.
But it gives you the idea. The part of the brain where fight or flight, that's the primitive brain. That is the, I used to understand it as the old brain, the original. That's the part that we have in common with animals. Okay, is that part of the brain right at the top of the stem of the, anyways. So, yeah, and then that part of the brain is the part that fight or flight is when you feel threatened, that part of the brain goes to work. Okay, it starts. Yeah, that's in that part of the brain, but it's more than just that one part. Nadine Burke just threw out the words real good on one of her TED Talks. She's awesome. If you ever need to, and she also has a very good introductory to ACE scores. Nadine Burke. She does TED Talks. It's also on YouTube. And she threw off, well, the pituitary sends this to this and this and this, and basically it's the old brain, midbrain is where the fight or flight comes in. And that part of the brain reacts really fast because it's to save your life, okay? And she tells a story, Nadine Burke tells a story about, all right, you're in the woods and a bear comes up and he growls at you, okay, your mind goes into fight or flight and you start assess, your heart rate goes up and your pulse quickens and, the adrenaline flows and you have to decide, okay, am I going to try to outrun this bear, I'm going to try to fight this bear, that part goes in. Well, that's all well and good because it's needed then. But if that bear comes into your house every single day, stays there every night, and you're every day, every minute of the day, in that fight or flight mode, all right, it over time it starts changing the brain. It becomes habitual. It's just the way you live, constantly in a state of fight or flight, no matter where you go, because you don't know any different. You're not able to recognize it. There are safe places, so you never feel safe. Okay, and then we've got the cortical part of the brain where the cortex, where the thinking skills are, and we have some really good thinking skills, but what happens is and I used to use cognitive therapies a lot when I worked in the mental health field, and it worked really good on some people. We still use it, but the problem with cognitive therapy is, you process, okay, this event, This event makes me think of this. I react because I'm thinking that. Well, unfortunately, the fight or flight response is a whole lot faster. Long before you can think about, what am I thinking about at this event? You've already reacted. And that's why you need a little more. You need to really, really work at learning to stop, step back, and think it through, and give your body a chance to calm down and get out of that fight or flight response before you have a reaction. And this is why even people with low A scores, I mean, people who are, if they're at all ready to react, that's why people get into fights over parking spaces, fights over little things like who forgot to pick this up at the store, or, it is because they're using that part of their brain and reacting. One of them, I can't remember if it was him or maybe, somebody gave an example of the kid misbehaved really bad. She talked to him, got him settled down, but she was still irritable from having to, reprimand the child and explain what they did. So when she walks into the kitchen and her husband's got the groceries there, she said, "Well, did you get?" And she's got this angry look on her face, because she's stressed. That's all it is. She's just stressed. Well, if her husband is someone who immediately goes into fight or flight response, I mean, there's a big blow up. Of course he picked it up, but he's going to react to her facial expression, her tone of voice, more so than the simple question, did you pick it up? And it's easy to see that this becomes a part of family dynamics, and it becomes generational. Okay? The parents teach the kid that this is the normal way. You react over somebody, and anger builds, and it just gets continually out of control. And each generation can get worse if somebody doesn't find a way to put a stop to it, somewhere in between. There's okay. I'm trying to. I think I need to go on to the beyond rubber stare. It becomes habitual. The autonomic nervous system reacts. All right, children who, by the way, children who have had, have no A scores, whose parents loved them and everything went well throughout their childhood, they will grow up to be calm, and never occur to them to overreact, and never would, which is interesting to me. I haven't known too many people like that, but there are people like that are so laid back and fine over almost everything. I met a lady one day in my thrift store. I talk to as many people as I can when they come into my thrift store. And I met a lady one time, I was talking about CSCAD, and her husband said, "Well, that's nice, it's good cause," and he was stopped to go look at something. When he checked down, he put some extra money in the donation can besides what he bought. But she stopped to talk to me. And she was my age or older. And she said, "I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't met him." She said, I don't think I would have survived. I get responses like that. And I get responses like, there was a young couple that came in one time. And I'm assuming they were just in a dating stage. I don't think they were a married couple. They came in, and I was telling them about CSCAT, and the young man, same response, "That's really nice," and he put extra money in when he left too. Anyways, but he didn't notice when he went to go look at things, she stayed there, tears streaming down her eyes, because I touched something that she hadn't dealt with, and she was real young. So I told her about our lending library, and I told her I urged her to get a therapist, and she said, well, she does have one. She needs to be spending more time with her, she knows. And, we had a nice long talk. Her boyfriend didn't even notice the tears were streaming down her eyes, because he was distracted, But there's a lot of people out there like that are, don't know that it's okay to talk to people and get help. And those are the people I'm trying to reach. And I'm also trying to reach the general community to develop empathy, which I'm going to get to too. All right, the ACEs study. The ACEs study is where they try to go from, dealing with a simple, this is therapy. You're not going to see that, I don't think.
Yeah, I probably can't. Let's see.
It's also in my handwriting, so it may not be legible. That way. I want to go backwards because the camera goes backwards. Anyways, the ACEs study, it was interesting. Vincent Folletti and Dr. Robert Anda. All right. Vincent Folletti was working as a therapist with severely obese people. They were all 100 plus pounds. And accidentally, he brought into a conversation that elicited the response of from this one woman about how she'd been molested her entire childhood, incest, and thank you for talking to me about it. He hadn't even planned to talk to her about it. It hadn't occurred to him that these people in this group were survivors of abuse. And that's when he started questioning things. And Nadine Burke has a similar thing that came out about the same time as these two were starting the ACE study. She was working in a clinic. There was a free clinic in a bad area where nobody had money and everybody was poor and struggling. And she started seeing that everybody coming in, especially the kids, were all off the walls, hyper and unable to process information and think, and she said, well, you know what you do? You look, where's this coming from? I mean, she gave the example of you go up to the well and see what's in it. If everybody drinking that water is, which made me think of Flint, Michigan, but you get the idea, And so she went to their homes and their schools and their neighborhood to start asking questions to see what is wrong in this neighborhood. And that's when she started learning about the link between abuse and dysfunction and physical health. And so she went on to talk about the ACE scores too once they would. Anyways, 1995 through 1997, it was a 3-year study, which sounds like a long time ago, but for something like this that is so different than what everybody believed for so long, I guess it's not surprising that a lot of people today still haven't heard about this. A lot of medical professionals haven't heard about this. So I've been educating them. Anyways, they studied 17,000 adults and followed them. They only followed them for 3 years in the initial study, but there's been studies going on ever since. Every university, medical school is doing some kind of studies. They're continuing. Not getting anything new from what the initial study had, but they're still checking for more things. It takes a while to get out. Anyways, they learned that people with an ACE score of 4. I need to get into how the ACE scores are determined. Okay, they checked for the following things. All right, they measured abuse in the terms of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. They measured neglect in the terms of emotional and physical neglect, and they checked for household dysfunction, and that included substance abuse, mental illness in the family, separation or divorce, incarcerated family members, or domestic violence. And what they simply did is, if you checked, yes, I've had, this physical abuse, you get 1 point, okay? And so they didn't even initially take in the time factor or the severity or any of that. Just if you experienced this abuse in your home or anywhere, actually anywhere, you get a point. And then what they did, and I've got a copy of you can get online of the ACE score. What they also checked was the family dynamics in the terms of, did you believe that your mother loved you? And those kind of points. And you get so many points for that. And then if you say you have an ACE score of 9, but you got a 3 on the my people loved me, then you subtracted 3 from that 9 to get a 6. So they factored in that, that support makes a difference. So your total ACE score is the 2 numbers. They found that approximately 67% of us have at least 1. Okay, but 1 is not a big determining factor. But it's common. It's not unheard of. Everybody's had some kind of trauma in their life. Most everybody. If you had 4 or more, you have a 12.6% increased likelihood of getting hepatitis, 2.5 times the likelihood of getting COPD, 2.5 times the suicidology, the thoughts of suicide, 12 times the depression, and 12 times in suicidology, and then 12 times in depression. And they go on and on and on with these kind of statistics. 7, if ACE score of 7 or above, 3 times the risk of lung cancer, 3.5 times ischemic heart disease. So those kind of things that you don't even realize have anything to do with physical health, they were finding were being linked to the amount of the abuse. And they talk about like elevated glucocorticoid, see, I can't even pronounce it, affect the nerves in the brain, which reduces synaptic connections. So the amount of abuse you have fewer synaptic connections to work with in your brain to make, when you process information and you're thinking and you're trying to make decisions, you don't have the synapses other people do. And then they also learned that MRI studies showed that we have a smaller brain. I mean, the actual gray matter is lessened. And different parts of the brain, like the part I was talking about, the part that where the fight and flight response is, that part of the brain is very formed. I mean, it actually grows when the part of the brain that learns to be calm and trust people, and that part of the brain shrinks. I mean, it's all being seen in MRI studies. Here's John Riggs. Oh, actually, this is John Riggs. Actually, I think I missed those 2 guys up. I said Scars, and I mixed John Riggs up. John Riggs is the one that talks about the cognitive brain and talks about how people become argumentative when they trigger the. Anyhow, that's a TEDx. John Riggs. I was talking about when I was reading a different card. They learned that brains are developed based on sensory experiences. And so when you continue to have your sensory experiences are all ones that lead to fight or flight response. That's how your brain forms. That's how your brain develops. Vincent Folletti says survivors of child abuse are 5,000 times more likely to attempt suicide, have an eating disorder, or be IV drug users. And I think he's starting with an ACE score of 4 or above. Those statistics were. The corpus callosum, that's the part of the brain that separates right brain from left brain. It shrinks. So there's less protection between the 2 different hemispheres of the brain. It's harder to separate the right brain and left brain. on the functions of each. There's some more symptoms. Rheumatoid arthritis, asthma, pain syndromes of any kind, which is like fibromyalgia and the arthritis, chronic fatigue, and ADHD. If you think about, you're constantly ready for fight or flight. You can't be still. You don't learn to be still. And I don't do very good at being still. I try to meditate and get out my Sudoku puzzle book, because that actually is meditative to me, because I can't totally relax enough to really meditate good. Have a group hour I go to on Monday nights. It helps in a group. 12% of the population have an A score of 4 or more, which is quite a bit. Six or more adverse childhood experiences reduce your life expectancy by 20 years. And that's pretty consistent. That's the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. Oh, they're the ones who paid for the original study. The CDC and Kaiser Permanente. Of course, score or more, heart disease is doubled. Alzheimer's is 4.1% higher, and 12 times greater risk of suicide, which is less than Vince Folletti said 5,000 times. Oh, okay. I think they're talking about completing suicide. He was talking about attempting suicide. COPD, diabetes, stroke, and cancer are all related. All right. One of the things they've found is, besides the physical stuff, they've also found that A scores also relate to taking risky health and social behaviors. Things like smoking is way higher in people with more A scores. That's self-medicating. And the same with drug abuse. It's interesting, they don't mention alcohol hardly at all in here, but they do mention it in one study I saw. I think they're afraid to. Does that make sense? I mean, because it's an accepted thing to drink. Isn't that? I don't know. But they talk about drug use.
It's a drug.
Yeah, it's a drug.
What about coffee? What about marijuana?
Actually, they do talk about, not too much with marijuana. Actually, it helps. Studies have shown that it helps with PTSD. And there are studies that show that. That's why they've managed to make it legal in so many places.
What about sugar?
And sugar. Yeah, sugar can do things. I learned that when I taught learning disabled. On this side they do list alcohol and alcohol abuse. A lot of people abuse alcohol that don't become alcoholics when they're self-medicating. Because I did that. I did that when I first got divorced. I social phobia. I couldn't go places, but I couldn't just stay home, and so I had to have a couple of drinks before I could go anywhere. Yeah, it made it easier to go into a bar or nightclub, and but I just couldn't keep drinking after I got there. Just as long as I could get in the door. But eating disorders are extremely common. I go to OA sometimes. I don't feel it's my core issue, but I do still go because it's still an issue, just not the core issue. Anyways, and there's a lot of people in there that have horror stories from their childhood, but that is their core issue, is body image or just the insatiable appetite, and liver disease. Autoimmune disease is extremely common. Various autoimmune disorders. People with Lyme disease and things like that, they seem to have it more. even though it's transmitted by a bug. I guess some people never get it, but that's because their body's different. Adolescent pregnancy is more common with people who have been abused. Okay, the risky behaviors of smoking, having sex at an early age, and drinking and drugging, all of those are children are very vulnerable, and that's why they get into these behaviors. And it's a coping mechanism but it actually worsens things. And so this is where it becomes important. This is important. Let me see if she said anything interesting. Oh, okay, I'm going to get to that. Okay. This is why it's important in the community that we try to. Preventing child abuse is all well and good, but people slip through the cracks, and we don't always catch it. A lot of families, the abuse is so hidden that in the outside world people would know. And this is where the community comes. It's important. It is so important for teachers and guidance counselors. This is why the schools really need active guidance counselors. If a kid's misbehaving in class and they're in trouble all the time, the guidance counselors need to take those kids out of the class and sit down and talk to them, about what is really going on, in your life outside of school. You could save lives. You can prevent that permanent brain damage if you catch it while they're in elementary grades. And the cost to the world around us is astronomical when you think about the people that actually end up in and out of jails, in and out of psych units, in and out of the homelessness. That they don't have hospitals are full of people who come in off the street, with nothing, and they have to, they have to stabilize them. They don't have to treat them. But anyways, it's we can prevent it. We can do things to intervene earlier in the community. And there's these two are things that I thought were relevant because they impacted me, and I think they do impact other survivors. I may have mentioned the title of my biography is The True Story of a Malingerer, because that's one of many diagnoses. If you go in and you can't clearly explain why you're why your life is falling apart, that's what you get labeled. And there's actually somebody who talks about that. The first person who proposed complex PTSD is a separate diagnosis from PTSD. Now, I don't know if that's back with the ICD or if that's trying to get it in the DSM here in this country. It's not in the DSM. It's everybody else's Bible. The ICD is worldwide. It's in there, but it's not in the DSM. Anyway, she states, all right, the clinical picture of a person who has been reduced to elemental concerns of survival is still frequently mistaken for a portrait of the survivor's underlying character. Rather than realize that, this person's struggling and really does need the help, you just think they got a flaw in their personal character and you dismiss them. And that happens a lot. Especially in the community. It happens a little less in the mental health field because they're starting to learn a little more and include more, but it happens all the time in the community. There are people in the community, they see you struggling, they see you having a meltdown. That's what this one is. I read this on a site studying autism, but the overlap between what goes on in the brain of someone with autism is similar in some ways. There's a definition in here of a meltdown. A meltdown is a reaction to overstimulation. And that happens to me very easily. I have to escape and find a quiet place sometimes. Not because I'm really good at sitting still or being meditative, but because I need to shut off the world around me because too much is coming at me all at once. That has to relate to maybe the corpus callosum being thin. Distractibility is extremely common. The ADHD stuff is extremely common with higher A scores. The higher, the worse. And I have sensory overload. When there's too many things going on, I totally freak. It's like I can't handle it all. I can't pay attention. That's why I didn't do well as a teacher. I couldn't pay attention to what I needed to be doing and what all the other kids in the room were doing. And it's from hypervigilance, and too, it's also hypervigilance is trying to pay attention to everything, even when instead of being able to focus, because you're always looking out for who's coming up behind you. But that's a meltdown. That is what you see with someone who has PTSD or complex PTSD, either way, or autism. You see it a lot in autism too. And a lot of people mistake that for what is a tantrum, and a tantrum is getting upset because you're not getting your own way. And I have come across that a lot in my life. I got to get out of this. I got to get away. I got to shut all this off. And if I can't, I'm falling apart. And then I get accused of wanting my way. My way is simply quiet somewhere. So anyway, those are relevant. Last. Okay. This is the last page of my educational program. My educational program, I don't have one of those up there either. Go ahead and go to my blog. That's the last one.
The last one? Okay.
Yeah. That's one place I can be contacted is via my blog. But my phone number's everywhere. On our Facebook page. Our Facebook page is cscat.org, because I did have the domain name at the time I named the page. I may have it, depending upon the truth of things, but anyways, I don't. The person whose name it's in is someone I don't have a good relationship with anymore. So anyway, cscat.org on Facebook. WNC Downsizing on Facebook is the page that has the higher priced items from our thrift store. But our thrift store, it looks like it's going to be going out of business eventually. Maybe not right away, because I'm opening in front of the store as long as I have room for it and have the time for it.
Where is it?
Gateway Market on US 74, just south of the Cherokee exit, across from the Starlight Motel. And I think we're going to end up closing down. I think I found other housing, and I'll just move everything else at the same time. But our lending library needs to go somewhere. We have a lending library for anybody who needs it. There's a lot of consumer stuff. At City Lights, I went over and checked to make sure everything was there that was needed for people to know the books we need, and put more bookmarks out. The bookmarks disappeared. They like my bookmarks. And that has my contact information on them. If you want to go there and donate money towards us, they'll let us know. Or if you want to pick out a book that you like, that you think we'll like, I've got a list of books there. 2 books we really, really need is clean copies of, because they're workbooks. People write in them. And they won't write in them anymore. I'll give them notebooks to write in. But we need clean copies of A General Guide Through the 12 Steps. And any 12-step books are useful. You can get those at the used bookstores. The General Guide to the 12 Steps is a workbook. It works for all programs. And then Pia Melody, I need her workbook, Breaking Free. It's awesome. I actually still haven't finished it, because you you get so far and it's like, oh my God, they're going to start over again. Because it's really, really a difficult workbook. But boy, I figure anybody who makes it through that workbook, they're pretty well walking on water. Okay? But it's really good. And her book that goes with it is awesome. It's the first one it really helped me understand, and this was after I'd worked in the mental health field. I'd, ran the Mental Health Association out in New Mexico. I mean, and, but her book just really informed me. This is a whole list of things. One thing people in the community could do is become educated on the issues and struggles of survivors. Anybody who wants to have our educational program, myself or someone else through our program, come and speak to your community group or your church or, in your school. Just give me a call or contact me. And, more people, as they learn about the struggles of survivors, will be able to put themselves in our shoes a little bit, a little better. They'll be able to a little better understanding of us. And if they can understand us, then they can develop empathy. I have a really good definition of empathy somewhere in here, but anyways, I don't remember which one it's in. All right. Empathy is not the same as sympathy. People know that, right? Okay. You can volunteer. Now, if you want to help other survivors, you can volunteer a lot of places in the community. As long as our thrift store is open, you can volunteer there. You can volunteer to. We need board members. We can actually use more board members. I'm starting to see what works. For so long, our organization was other survivors, other walking wounded, who just, were dealing with their own struggles, and they were really coming looking for answers, like I did when I went into the mental health field, looking for answers. That's not a way for a board to function. I have a really awesome board member. Should be on one of these cards too. Anyways, it's around here. We've already gone long enough. I have a awesome board member that has so much empathy, and she's such an awesome worker because she's very together. I don't have to explain anything to her. She thinks for herself and is able to do a lot of things. But she's also got the empathy to work with me really, really well. And I had talked to her about being a board member, but she was the first board member that didn't tell me her story of abuse. And what I found out was she hadn't been abused, but her mother had. Her mother was one of those people that broke the cycle and was a good mother to her child. And but my board member, she's able to see. She saw what her mother went through, what she struggled with, and has just awesome empathy, and is working with me on my educational program. And depending upon a group, I might let her speak to a group if she wants to. Though I think she's a pretty busy person. But anyways, that's okay. So you can also volunteer somewhere like the community table. I mean, people that struggle, that's where they end up. And there's other thrift stores that end up food pantries, churches, work on housing, work on anything you can do to improve low-income housing for people. A lot of the housing programs, they don't understand the disabling condition of what we have. Okay, I mean, if you're going to come in a wheelchair and or crutches and you're carrying around your oxygen machine, those kind of things fit into. They figure that out, but they do not get us. I don't, transportation is often needed, but don't pick up hitchhikers unless somebody recommends it, because you don't know who they are. But if you meet somebody, and you get to know them and they need rides to doctors, please get them there. I mean, that's something that's very much needed. most of us manage to make enough money to either have a roof over our head or a car. Not always both. I've seldom had both. Let's see. When you meet a survivor, okay, when you're like say you go to work in the community table, don't give advice. It's usually not welcome, okay? It comes across as condescending, and it comes across as judging. So don't say anything that could be interpreted as discouragement or a put down either. But be nice, be polite, be friendly, and accepting, of people that are different. Donate to us, donate to food pantries, donate to local shelters. Our nearest shelter is in Haywood County, but you can donate there. And all of the churches, most of the churches out there have food closets, or they have clothes closets that they offer to people in the community. And it doesn't, every one of them doing their own thing, so it's kind of, it's hard to follow. So any church that you hear does it, and you've got some extra clothes, like coats in the winter and blankets, take them there to the various churches, and donate money. Our organization is working towards its 501c3. I found out my other board member, the one with the law degree, he said he could do, I didn't realize he could really do it. I was talking to him the other day about something else he was doing, and he could do the 501c3. We just need the money. So I asked him to look into what it might cost today. The last nonprofit I know about paid $500. The one before that paid $300, and then you said the Canary Coalition paid like $60. So it goes up every few years, unfortunately, which is kind of sad that we operate without if we have a 501c3 that is nonprofit status through the federal government, you can have a tax write-off for donating to us. Right now, if you want a tax write-off, I'm still able to get it through Entrepreneur Skills Network, their 501c3. I just give them 10%. Otherwise, you can donate if you don't have to have a tax deduction anytime, anywhere. Through my blog, there's a PayPal link, or just give me a call. My number's, like I say, my number's on my blog page. It's on my Facebook pages, everywhere. 828-506-6141. And I think that's about it.